In the conversation you're about to listen to, you're going to meet Carin. Now, Carin is one of the wellbeing coaches here at Wellbeing People, and I interviewed her to find out what it's like to live with type 1 diabetes. I learned an awful lot about the disease, about how it affects your habits, about the constant play that it has on your mind. And I also just had a lot of compassion and empathy whilst I was listening to Carin, and it gave me a much greater awareness about type 1 diabetes. So whether you're listening to this on a walk, on a run, whilst cleaning the house, wherever you like to listen to your content, I really hope that you find it insightful. I hope that it gives you some new information. And more than anything, I hope that it reinforces the fact that optimal well-being is unique, personal, and subjective to each and every one of us. And we're on our own journey. So without further ado, here's Carin. Carin, hello. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So in today's wellbeing talk, I'm joined by the lovely Carin, who's actually one of our wellbeing coaches here at Wellbeing People. Do you mind me asking sort of how long ago, well, like when was your first diagnosis, or when did you first become aware of that you were kind of living with this?
Yeah, so most people often don't know very much about type 1 diabetes, but if they do, they think of it something that children get, and that's sort of the majority, but not really. But it's a little bit more of being diagnosed in childhood. I, on the other hand, was diagnosed in my 30s.
Oh wow.
So I was diagnosed about 9 years ago, in 2013, and it just came out of the blue. Really, I'd had a bit of a cold. It was sort of around October time, and I just developed a cough that just wouldn't go away. And I was unwell sort of with a cold for a week or so, but it just wouldn't go away, and I just kept having this cough, and I sort of just kept getting more and more tired, and it sort of crept up to me until the point where I sort of realized that. So where I live is really close into the town centre. It's just a 5-minute walk, but I just had that big realization when I just thought, that I needed to go to the shops, but I don't have the energy to walk there. So I need to get in the car. I can't physically walk that far. And then it just started with just all the typical symptoms, really, that you would develop. Shall I go into them?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, what were the symptoms that you noticed?
So if anybody was to come across this or suspect that they've got it, or somebody, in their family or close friends or whatever, quite key ones to look out for are what they sort of refer to as the 4 T's. And they're not the only symptoms, but they are ones that most people would get, and the sort of biggest ones. So it starts out with being really, really thirsty. So I drank, and I am somebody who do have to have loads of reminders and habit triggers in place to drink throughout the day, because I just don't get very thirsty. But during this time, I just downed just gallons of water and just could not, that completely unquenchable thirst. And so with this also comes going to the toilet all the time. And in fact, I think going to the toilet comes before, because it has something to do with, how your kidneys are not, operating properly. And that's actually what drives the thirst. But anyway, so being really thirsty, going to the toilet all the time, and then being really, really tired, like I said, just completely no energy. And the final one is thinner. So losing weight is a key one. And I lost about 10 kilos.
What, in a very short space of time?
In a short space of time, yeah. So first you sort of obviously lose all kind of excess fat or anything, and then because your body is just starving, it just literally starts to break down. So then it breaks down muscle mass and everything. So yeah, so at the point of my diagnosis, I was really thin.
Oh wow. And so before that though, so this was in your early 30s. Before that, were there warning signs before, or was it literally like late onset type 1 diabetes came on in your early 30s?
Yeah, no, there was nothing beforehand. And I guess the sort of disease sort of, it starts happening maybe over like a few months, and then your symptoms get worse and worse. And I think I was really lucky when I was diagnosed, in that I was able to go and see a specialist privately. And so I actually sort of diagnosed myself because I recognized I was Googling all of these symptoms and I thought this seems like a clear-cut case to me. So I actually went to Boots and I bought one of these blood sugar testing kits.
Okay,
I
yeah.
tested my blood sugar, and it was a really, mechanic with a little twisty, compare the color type of thing. And then I called my GP and I said, I think it's about 15. And she said, that's not good news.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so then I got, to see a specialist who diagnosed me very quickly, but they did say that I was probably, days, or if not hours away from diabetic ketoacidosis, which is, the really serious.
Yeah, deadly. Yeah, absolutely. So that must have been quite a shock to. Before that, were you stereotypically healthy? Were you
Normal,
active?
yeah.
Were you well?
Yeah, always been very active, and yeah, like I said, I've always been into, health and wellness, food and nutrition and exercise has always been a big thing. So yeah.
So it must have been quite a shock to the system, and almost like I don't want to put words in your mouth, but how did you feel then when your body effectively, you've done all of this stuff, you've looked after yourself, and then your body has decided, no, not playing ball anymore.
Yeah,
like how was that emotionally to deal with?
Yeah, I mean it's it can be frustrating and and quite tough, but it's also when often when you're at that point, and I was so incredibly ill, and because I'd sort of diagnosed myself and kind of knew, then once you have that, somebody tells you, it's almost a relief as well, because then you can start doing something about it. But of course, I at that point, like most other people, did not have a clue what that actually meant. I kind of thought they're going to give me insulin and I'll be fine, and that'll be it.
Yeah, of course. And so in that case, for our audience, what does a day-to-day look like? What changes have you had to make in terms of your habits and everything, kind of living with type 1 diabetes now that you didn't necessarily have to do like a number of years ago?
Yeah. So obviously before, I didn't really have to think about anything or worry about anything. And I do very specifically remember, but on that day when I was diagnosed, and the nurse was showing me, all the needles and the testing kits and the blood sugar meters and everything, and I realized that I would have to inject insulin, at a minimum of 4 or 5 times a day. So I was a bit like, what? How, I have to inject that often? And I just remember her saying, that's the least of your problems.
Really?
And she was absolutely correct, because it's such a small a part of it. But basically, to answer your question, when I wake up in the morning, and if I do wake up in the morning, it's been a good night, but mostly or maybe not mostly, but very often I would already woken up over the course of the night to manage the blood sugars, because they might be going up or down overnight, and I would wake up, be alarmed by that, to have to sort it out. But otherwise, it's the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning. I check what my blood sugars are, and if I need to do anything to adjust them accordingly, then I'll do that. And then basically from then on, there is not a second of the day that I am not monitoring what's happening. And I was quite lucky, I think, at the point when I was diagnosed, because I only spent, I think, about 18 months or so before the new technology started coming in with the digital glucose monitors and things that I wear all the time, that I've got on my arm.
I was going to ask you, so when you say alarm, like your alarm to wake up, that's because you have the monitor on your arm
and then beeping at me.
Yeah,
okay. That's right. Yeah.
My screen over.
And sometimes the technology fails and I wake up myself. But yes, basically, so I get alarms when my blood sugar is too high or too low. And so because of the technology, I very helpfully can see my blood sugars all the time on my smartwatch, which is absolutely fantastic. So like I said, the technology just came in shortly after, and I was on the waiting list, as one of the first people to buy it. So that's fantastically helpful, but it's not like 100% reliable. So you do still have to check with blood, and especially when you're getting readings that doesn't seem correct. So yesterday, for example, all of a sudden it starts screaming at me that my blood sugar is dangerously low, and I'm thinking I feel okay, so I don't think that's right. So I have to double check with the blood, and then sometimes it doesn't work.
And it's still an interruption in your day, right? Like you said, like every second, it's always at the back of your mind, where it's like, okay, well, where are they? And just to reiterate your point of like, you feel fortunate that your diagnosis came in and then the technology came in. Just for anyone who isn't aware, what would of that looked like if you weren't using the technology? What would a day-to-day have looked like at the beginning for you? Because I know that I worked with many of clients where again it just blew my mind on the amount of things they then had to do in the day.
So of course, and now I can't imagine living without that technology, but because I can now see that, or if my blood sugar is one number when I wake up, 10 minutes later it will be something very different, and it can go up or down, depending on what I did last night or what I ate the day before, or there's so many things that influence it. So if I didn't have that technology, I would have to finger prick and test my blood manually all the time. And so that would I would do that at least 10 times a day. And you would have to check, obviously, before you eat, after you eat, before you do exercise, after exercise, before you drive. You're not allowed to get in a car and drive unless your blood's still stable. So the DVLA keeps check on that as well, that we're managing blood sugars properly. So it's a constant, really, just monitoring what I'm doing over the course of the day.
And I can't even imagine, because that means that obviously when you're out with friends, all of these things that actually just people take for granted, going out for dinner and all of that sort of stuff, you're having, or you would have had to sneak away, or maybe, you were comfortable doing it at the table or whatever, do the finger prick test. But, a lot of the time I'm guessing that would have probably been like, oh, I'll just try and find somewhere a bit private to do it, because, people aren't well, I don't know. Did you used to sneak away and do it privately, or did you used to do it?
Yeah, well, actually, and also now since a year back or so, I'm using an insulin pump, so I don't have to, get the needles and pens out and inject all the time. But I have to say, actually, right from the start, and maybe because I was already in my 30s, I see there's a lot in people that I come across, teenagers and stuff, who, don't want to be different, don't want to be seen, who would always sneak off to the toilet to inject or check their blood sugars. I didn't care that particularly much, but certainly situations where, if you're out and about skiing, for instance, it's very difficult when, like, oh, I'm gonna have to, I'm not feeling great, I need to check my blood, stopping in the middle of the slope and getting the blood kit out. It's not always the most convenient. And like you said, when you're out and about, a while ago I was at an art exhibition, and it was a dead silent room of people walking around. Apart from me, he was going beep, beep, beep. and it won't stop until you line up. So, I mean, you can go in and change the settings so that they're silent for an hour whilst it settles. But yeah, things like that. There's always somebody going, what's that noise? So it's just me.
Yeah, of course. Blimey. And so in terms of then, like how else does it tend to impact like your habits, your family life? What are other things that you wish that people were aware and had that level of awareness for people who might not understand the disease?
Yeah, I think a key thing is that, and like I said, I didn't really know much about type 1 before I was diagnosed, so I totally understand that people don't know. But a misconception is that people think it's just related to sugar, right? So you can't eat sugar. Well, I mean, first of all, I can, and I have to to keep alive, basically, at this point. But people do think that it's it just has to do with sugar, or it just has to do with carbohydrates. And although food is a huge part and one of the biggest impacts on you, it's only just one thing. And if I cut out carbohydrates completely, my body will then use the protein and the fat and turn that into sugar, because, as you know, your body just needs that sugar for energy, and it won't take anything else. So
to just clear this up for our audience, like just to really simplify this in a way, because I think where a lot of the confusion comes is obviously type 1 and type 2 diabetes, isn't there? So just to simplify this, type 1 diabetes means that your body will go into highs, and then it will also go into lows, because basically insulin isn't doing the job. It's not being released by the pancreas to do the job it needs to do. Type 2 diabetes, on the other hand, means that your blood sugar is always high. And I've actually worked with a number of people who have been so unaware around their own disease, where they've had type 2 diabetes, that they've said, oh, you know, I need a Mars bar, or like I feel like I'm going into a hypo. And it's like, that doesn't actually happen with type 2 diabetic, you know, very, very unlikely unless you're insulin dependent. And but for most type 2 diabetics, your blood sugar is always going to be high. And so then that's where the misconception around, well, you know, it's a lifestyle disease, do you just need to cut out sugar, all of that sort of stuff sort of comes from.
Absolutely. There's definitely that confusion where people hear diabetes and they think type 2, and they also think that, you know, you brought that on yourself. But for type 2, although it can be caused by, you know, lifestyle choices, there's also a lot of things, you know, around stress and genetics that affects that, you know, that could cause that as well. But yeah, you're right. Type 1 diabetes, your body does not produce any insulin. Type 2, your body can't use the insulin and it's to insulin resistance. So where we were saying, where there's a lot of focus on carbohydrates and food, I think there's over 50 different events and happenings that would affect your blood sugars as well. And so for me, I mean, hormones is a huge one. So for women, hormonal, you know, menstrual fluctuations throughout the month, that has an effect, but also huge ones like adrenaline and cortisol have a massive effect on my blood sugars, and we've talked about that as well. So things like, you know, if I'm doing a sport, like something competitive, and this is where exercise can become a bit difficult, because if you don't know what's going to happen at your boot camp session, for instance, it could either reduce your blood sugar or make them shoot up to the sky. So adrenaline in that sense, doing, you know, competitive sports, but also, you know, dealing with stressful events and nerves, that will have an effect. You know, the temperature, you know, the amount of sleep I get or lack of sleep, what I ate the day before, everything, you know, it's a, you know, you have to be a bit of a scientist, but it's also, you know, there are those memes that say, you know, welcome to type 1 diabetes, where every day of your life is a science experiment.
Yeah, of course. I mean, even just listening to that, you know, you like it does feel kind of overwhelming just on like, okay, well, how do you manage all of that? So in terms of, if you were to give your younger self some advice, or someone else who maybe has been recently diagnosed or is struggling to manage their type 1 diabetes, what are some of the things that you found to be helpful for you? Obviously, doesn't mean that it's this is advice, because everyone's unique and different, but what have you found specifically that's been helpful for you?
Yeah, I think you're right to point out that everybody is different. So everybody does, you know, effects have, you know, your whatever affects your blood sugar is different from one person to another, and certainly how we metabolize food and all of those types of things. So but I think, and what I certainly did very much in the beginning, and sometimes I think I could do a bit more now, is just, you know, having that perfectionist mindset. So early on I would freak out if my blood sugars were, you know, out of range and I didn't know why. Now, nearly 10 years on, I know that now I don't know why, but, you know, I'll just have to start over again and, you know, it's literally like 1 hour at a time. So sometimes if you get a little bit too focused on constantly keeping your blood in range, it's absolutely exhausting, and especially for people who are diagnosed young, that have to live with this all their lives. It's very, very common for people to crash, and it's called diabetic burnout, when you just can't do it anymore. And then teenagers have those added things of not wanting to stick out and you know, not wanting to be different from everyone else. So it's you know, it's common for people to sort of just stop taking their insulin, or just can't be bothered checking their blood sugars, which is, of course, is very dangerous. And that's again where I said, you know, if I had to have this, I think it was quite good that it was at that point in my life where I'm already, you know, responsible and but certainly, because there are so many things that happen and you can't be on top of it all the time, you just have to allow yourself to just reflect and learn, you know, from what's happening, and try not to, you know, beat myself up about it. And I do have those, if I'd having a bad period of time when I think, I just don't know why this is happening now. Why is it high? Why is it low? I don't understand. I haven't done anything different. You know, it's, you know, we have that quote where, you know, when we talk about habits, and when you say, when you're doing the same thing every time and expecting a different result. But that's exactly what type 1 is like. I do the same thing every day and I just know it's going to be different.
Wow. Yeah.
The effects on your blood sugar. So I would say that to my specialist diabetes nurse at one point, being really frustrated, and I don't understand this, and I don't know why it's like this, and this isn't good enough, and in the time and range that we focus on, and she would just say, you have type 1 diabetes. Of course it's not. Of course it's not. It's not possible, And
Wow.
I think that's a good reminder to.
So it's almost like a lesson that you just have to keep on relearning and relearn, that it's
like treading
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have to roll with the punches, and it's a tough one especially in a world where we can get so much data at the click of a finger and things like that. It feels like we should. I always hate to use the word should, because we should all over ourselves, but it feels like we should be able to get that data, and that must be where a lot of that frustration comes from for type 1 diabetics, where it's like you said, I'm doing the same thing on Mondays, I'm doing on Tuesday, but my blood sugars are saying a completely different thing, which just goes to show us how much we still need to learn about the human body, right? And how much of a complex machine it really is.
Absolutely. And it's a really good point as well with the technology and the data and stuff, because we have all of that and it's super helpful, but sometimes, and I would not want to be without it for the world, like literally when I start up a new sensor, which I do every 10 days, that time when it's loading up, I just feel completely lost. So I would never want to be without it, but it is certainly that aspect of when it just gets a little bit too much. There's too much analyzing to be done. Like, you can always find an answer, but you need to spend all your waking hours thinking and analyzing. So we just have to learn from every day, and try and implement that and just do the best that we can.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a lovely advice for people who will be watching this as well and thinking, okay, well, yeah, it doesn't need to be perfect all the time. The body is generally fairly resilient. So it's finding those gaps, isn't it? Okay, perfect. And so let's wrap up in that case. What one thing do you wish that that other people knew about type 1 diabetes that you wouldn't have to keep on explaining, or what do you wish they would start doing or stop doing? If there's like always one question that you wish, just stop asking me that, or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think going back to the whole, sugar and carbohydrate thing, and I think I've been quite lucky in that I don't think I've come across a lot of people who have sort of been prejudiced or said negative comments or such to me, but I have come across a lot of other people with type 1 diabetes who have come across those people who say, can you really eat that, or you probably ate too much sugar as a child, or things like that are really unhelpful. But I think in general, I would just want people to have more general awareness of what type 1 diabetes is, and understand how it is such a every minute of every day full-time job, and it's not just about taking the insulin when you eat and you're fine, which I sort of thought before I was diagnosed, that it is really complex and it's exhausting, and it doesn't go away. So just so people be mindful of how, if they have people in their close surroundings with type 1 diabetes, to just not judge, because sometimes we have bad days and sometimes we have good days, and we just have to keep going.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, you have that constant always on your plate as well, which then, like you said, can be very exhausting and can cause that, I've not heard that term before, but that diabetes burnout, which makes complete sense to me, because if you always got something going over and over in your head, then at some point it's likely to go, I just don't want to deal with that monkey at the moment. So thank you so much for your insights, Carin. I think this would be really helpful for a number of people. And thank you for being such an amazing member of the team here at Wellbeing People as well. If people obviously do want to get in touch with you, they can connect. The easiest way is probably through our website to go into wellbeingpeople.com, and you can book Carin to come and talk or do a workshop for you. But then also you're heavily involved in the Facebook community, aren't you? Wellbeing People, the Wellbeing People community. So then they can connect with you there as well. But Otherwise, let's wrap today up and just say thank you very, very much for joining me and for sharing a bit of an insight into what optimal wellbeing is for you and your biggest struggle. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.